Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is a frontline update for the Ukraine war for the 27th of January 2023. My name is Jonathan MS Pearce. Let's get straight to it. It should be a fairly, somewhat shorter video than normal. I do go on, I know, because there's not a lot of information coming out from certain areas. Take, for example, where we go to first of all, Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna. This front line here, virtually no reports from anyone of significance there. Rebar's not made any reports from yesterday. No reports. Defmon, no reports says this. No reportable changes on other fronts. This is other than Vuhledar. There is some movement around Svatove, but this is too early to report on. The same goes for the area east of Bilorivka, south of Kreminna. Once I have that confirmed by my contacts on the ground, and it is safe to share, I will. There is this claim, though. Russians ring the alarm bells about the Svatove area. So just to let you know, Svatove area is just around here. It's an area that the Ukrainians definitely want to take, a bit of a logistics hub, and it allows them to strike on towards Starobilsk, or at least take Starobilsk out, its ground lines of communication out by HIMARS. Soldiers majors and captains die left and right. Soldiers going in against artillery with machine guns. Everyone is disorientated and they complain about bad leadership. This isn't the first time. Warnings about verification, whether this is indeed Ukrainian propaganda, but it is supposedly from a Russian source. Let's go and look at it. Let's get the translation. So I'll just show you how to do that. If you ever come across an image with foreign writing on, you can search Google with image, search the image with Google, and once it comes up this, you press translate and it should translate it for you. So this says Anastasia Karachurova, and again, a lot of messages come in the Svatovsky direction, Svatova. I talk with the wives and with the fighters and with the higher leadership. Everything is confirmed. I ask those who follow me and scribble denunciations against me, you can include the following information there. Orders are given by leadership that is not in position. As a result, we are going against artillery with machine guns. We can neither take the point nor save the personnel. Empty and even, I would say, criminal waste of human resources. Both privates and our officers are dying. Major M, vets died. Ensuring the retreat of our soldiers, covering the guys. Battalion commander Captain Marnov was wounded. We have so many majors and captains. Okay, I'm not going into strategy, but after such cases, when an impossible order is placed, unrealistic. When the battalion and company are left with command, they are disorientated. The guys are looking for their own. They come. They are told to the rest, go to the same positions again without a strategy and without cover, only with a machine gun, or you are deserters. So that's Google Translate of that. It's not going to be a perfect translation in terms of making the most amount of sense, but you get the gist there, which is that things aren't great on that front. There's a lot of deaths and injuries, disorientation, and ill-equipped to fight against artillery and so on and so forth. However, that said, it's been slow going in the Svatove area. There has been some movement around Kuzmivka, but other than that, really not a lot to report over the last week or so, really. Makivka to Chervonopepivka and around Ploshchanka here. Repelled attacks around Chervonopepivka. Deep State map has the only movement I can see in this area over the last few days is, so this is 24th, 25th, 26th, and there's a tiny bit of movement just to the east of Nevska. So that's here. So there's a bit of movement towards, this is that area that I said the Russians had control of. It's heights between these gullies. And it could be that it's around there that the Ukrainians are pushing back, because it looked like the Russians had started to establish themselves there. Anyway, not a lot else to report. The ISW even says basically there's repelled attacks from the Torsky direction. The Ukrainians are pushing from Torsky direction, which is down here towards Kreminna. So repelled attacks from the Russians. That could be, from that direction, could mean anywhere around here, basically. Not a lot of detail, really. And fighting in the forest area near Kreminna, Ukrainian General Staff stated that Russian forces carried out a limited ground attack in Chervonopepivka. But other than that, that's what we've got from there. And no reports talks about activity going on east of Bilorivka, but he's waiting for confirmation about that. He often says things like that. Sometimes they don't sort of really come through. He gets a bit excited, I think, and then the reality is maybe it doesn't quite work out or whatever. But there's almost certainly operational security about things going on in this whole sort of Kreminna area. It could be that there's some limited success for the Ukrainians east of Bilorivka. Okay, so let's go down to the Bakhmut area. So as we come down from Bilorivka towards Kamianske, repelled attacks around there, Spirina, and then we come on to the Vesely Roslivka, Bladatny, all of these areas, there is activity, just not a lot of movement. According to the ISW, geolocated footage posted on the 25th shows that the Russian forces have made incremental advances in the southeastern outskirts of Bakhmut. So that will be around the Opitny area. Russian mill bloggers continue to discuss fighting within Bakhmut itself. A Ukrainian Eastern grouping of forces spokesman Cherevati reported that Russian forces conducted 39 combat clashes in one day in the Bakhmut direction, and that Russian forces lost almost an entire battalion in combat clashes on January 25th alone. Ukraine's Joint Forces Task Force noted that the Wagner Group is using small unit tactics and squad-sized assault detachments of 4 or 5 people to attack and infiltrate urban areas of Bakhmut. Okay, just reading that will give you the sense that Russians are losing a whole load of people around here, and I'm absolutely certain that is the case. This is hugely attritional, but we must remember that Ukrainians will be losing that as well. So while, of course, Cherevati there will say, well, they've lost almost a battalion at X, Y, and Z, he's not saying what the Ukrainians are losing. If you want to get a sense of what one opinion, and remember this needs to be taken as potentially an isolated opinion, or at least kind of not anecdotal, but this is one guy's experience on the ground with his unit around Bakhmut. Check out Willie OAM's interview with an Australian fighter who has been fighting around there, who has a lot of combat experience. And he's pretty scathing about the Ukrainian, the corruption, the command structure, and the losses and the morale of the Ukrainians in the Bakhmut area. How much that is fully representative, how much it's representative up and down the front line, is open for debate. How accurate it is open for debate, but it's worth listening to get a sense of balance as to how well things are going. My opinion, like I said earlier today in my news piece and recently, is that this is a numbers game. The whole thing is a numbers game, and Bakhmut is pretty representative of that. So the question is, do Ukraine want to bleed Russia for as much as possible? Yes. But if Russia have that many more people than Ukraine, then they can afford, like I said so many times, this is a Pyrrhic victory in the making. So if Russia are prepared to sacrifice a load of people at the altar of Bakhmut, then Ukraine might be able to bleed them in a way that's that on paper shows that they've won essentially, but they won't win because Russia will just overcome them with numbers. So therefore, Ukrainians will need to outmaneuver them. This needs to be a command and control thing where their maneuvering is far better, where they're being far more efficient, and for that they need the best equipment. They need the best munitions and weaponry and drone equipment. They need all these combined arms sort of components to come together, and they need very good sort of HIMARS plus, in terms of range, ordnance to take out logistics that are feeding into Bakhmut. So there's an awful lot of stuff that needs to happen. If the sole objective is to just bleed Russia for as much as they can, and it's okay to lose ground eventually, to lose Bakhmut, Russia will be fine with that. So that it may be that Russia loses 3 times as many troops as Ukraine in this area, and Ukraine might say, or some people might say, yeah, that's a success. Well done, Ukraine. They've bled the Russians for much more, but the Russians are fine with that, and that's a problem. You look at the history of Russian military accomplishments over the last sort of century or so, then that's part of their doctrine pretty much. They will throw people at the problem, and if they take that territory, then that's a success for them. So the Ukrainians, on the other hand, can't afford to lose that kind of expertise. This guy interviewed by Willie OAM is saying that there are people that have been sent to the front line here, and again, is it true? But people being sent to the front line who've only had a couple of weeks training. And this is what we hear about the Russians, about their mobilized, about their conscripts. But actually, he's saying that the same is happening in Bakhmut because they're losing so many people. They're having to just, throw in reinforcements who are not battle ready. They haven't been sent into defensive places first. They're literally their first assignment is offensive maneuvers in the Bakhmut area. Or it is defensive, but whether it's counterattack, so on and so forth. So uh, there could be a lot of problems for the Ukrainians here. Depends how much store you put in those kind of claims. There doesn't appear to have been all that much movement on the front line here. In terms of, as you can see from ISW, and basically everyone, no one is reporting an awful lot. It all seems to be about Vuhledar. However, there is claims, as you saw in ISW, from the southeast, so that's going to be this area, maybe Opitny. Haven't heard much about this eastern area because my opinion would be that the Russians need to just chill out. If I was a Russian commander, I'd be saying, right, we'll fix the Ukrainians here, but no major offensives because that will chew through our forces. And it's all about Klishchivka and it's all about sort of Perskivivka and Krasnohora up here. Once you get this right, I mean, there are claims now that Ukraine are relying pretty much on this smaller road coming in, that there's fire control over these other ground lines of communication. That's a huge problem for Bakhmut, of course, going forward. And what you don't want, or what they don't want, is to be, not if not fully encircled, then isolated, in a way that they can't successfully get supplies through into Bakhmut, and then it's kind of like it's that slow death of Bakhmut in the same way potentially we saw at Mariupol, or do they get out? Is it more like some of the other places, Severodonetsk, so on and so forth? So yeah, that's the situation. Deep State map has a tiny bit of movement. You can see, so this is 24th, 25th, a big gain in this Klishchivka area. So let's remind you that 24th, some minor gains up north, and then a tiny bit of gain here, just both to the west and to the east of Klishchivka. So on my map, actually, I've already got a bit of that gain. So there's a tiny bit of gain up there, and then a bit of gain over here, which is kind of what we'd expect. I'm going to wait to just see how this pans out, but you can see that the Russians are really going to be pushing up towards this road here and pushing up towards Ivanivska from the east of Klishchivka, or indeed just cutting off that road there. So those are going to be your movements. There's incremental gains today, or yesterday, I should say. But other than that, not a great amount of news coming out for there. Maybe that stabilization. If you're looking for positives, it may be that Wagner are running out of steam, but it then seems that they are just being propped up by the regular Russian forces now. There's a lot to be said for the way Russia do their fighting. Again, refer back to this interview. Wagner do their fighting in terms of having each troop having like an IR chip. So each soldier being identifiable on the battlefield, and it's like controlling overhead. A drone overhead will be able to calculate exactly where each individual soldier is and report that back to the commander. So they're using groups of 5, 10, 15, and it is just like a computer game type thing where you're sending them in, you try and finding the weakness, and when you find that weakness and you've hit them with waves of these convict soldiers, then the Wagner true and proper go in with their much better kit, much better expertise, and exploit that weakness. And that seems to be the way that Wagner have operated for some time. I did report on that a couple of months ago when War in Ukraine did a whole segment on that. And it appears to be what this guy is telling Willie OAM in that interview. Anyway, let's move further on. As we come down here, we pass some of these areas of Novo-Bakhmutivka, Krasnohorivka, Kamianske to the north that have seen some activity over the last few weeks. So let's see what Deep State Map has for this area. So if we come down to, there we go. Let's see what changes they've had in this northern area over the last few days. So actually no changes in that northern area, or maybe a little bit up there in the northern Bakhmut. And then we come down here. Let's look at the southern area of Avdivka, and we have, again for them, back on the 21st, Vodyane taking a bit of a hit to the western side of Vodyane. So for them, they're a pro-Ukrainian mapping source. Not too much difference around here. However, some of the pro-Russians are saying they're making some gains up in this area, or there's a lot of heavy fighting up there. And down in this area, down the south of Vodyane, and I've got quite a conservative map compared to some Russian sources that have kind of this whole area of Vodyane and just to the north of Vodyane as well. Now, ISW says Ukrainian General Staff reported Ukrainian troops repelled a Russian attack on Marinka on the southwestern outskirts of Donetsk city. We'll get there in a second. Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces continue to fight for the western part of Marinka. Yep, of course, they always say that. Another mill blogger claimed that the Donetsk People's Republic took control of Vodyane on the northwestern outskirts of Donetsk, the city that is. The Russian mill blogger noted that DNR forces are exhausted from fighting different battles on the Axis and that they are lacking manpower to hold territory or pursue further advances near Donetsk. Now, that's interesting, and that's from a Russian source. Whether they have exhausted themselves here and are unable to make further gains, one might think that's a good time to hit them back on the counterattack in the Vodyane area. I don't know, but certainly that is the opinion of one Russian military blogger. As we come down here, Marinka, as I keep saying, you get people like Rebar saying, yeah, we're fighting on the western outskirts, and then the map looking unchanged. And there's been repelled attacks there. I don't know what changes might or might not have happened in Marinka over the last week. There's no detail about Marinka. It's funny, you get sort of a lot of detail about certain places, then suddenly the focus goes elsewhere and details are thin on the ground for particular places. Marinka is one of them. But really, all the talk is about Vuhledar over the last 48 hours plus. It is suddenly back in the news in terms of consistent attacks by the Russians from several directions. So just to remind you, for those who don't know, if this is the first time you watched, etc., etc., Vuhledar is on elevated ground. It dips down to Pavlivka. The elevated ground sort of comes along this way. In fact, actually, I think Null Reports has got the topographical map here. Yep, so you got Vuhledar here, elevated ground along there, but it dips down to Pavlivka. And traditionally, what's happened over the last sort of couple of months is the Russians have been consistently trying to attack Vuhledar through this one, from this one direction, and they've been doing that and getting absolutely hammered. But then doing it again and again and trying to take Pavlivka. But then the Ukrainians here in Vuhledar, it's high-rise buildings there allow them. So all of these buildings that you can see there allow them line of sight down to Pavlivka and all around here, and they're just firing ATGMs or even sniping and artillery, just hammering the Russians here. And so the Russians lost a huge amount of troops and equipment in doing these repeated things. And then just now we've seen them try several things, which is attack from here to fix in the Ukrainian troops, whilst also doing a large-scale attack from Mikilska. In fact, taking some of this Mikilska ground here, and then subsequently attacking up to this area of sort of farmland, dachas, these sort of more rural settlements to the south and to the southeast, and that's basically what's been happening. But all the while, absolutely hammering Vuhledar with artillery. So this is Vuhledar, as you can see, fires raging in multiple places. This is, I mean, imagine being there and trying to defend this from attacks on the ground while you're being hammered from above as well. So this is now Russians using combined arms army initiatives, which is exactly the sort of thing they should have been doing all the time. I don't know why it's taken them so long to adapt, but they do seem to be doing proper military activity now, or at least using doctrine that isn't just throwing people at a problem in some of these places. And Vuhledar is one example, and it is tough there at the moment. There is consistent artillery barrage. So this is, I believe, from last night. I mean, just imagine that. How much ordnance is hitting Vuhledar, and you are trying to defend that. I mean, obviously it's at night, and the Russians aren't particularly good at doing night maneuvers, so they don't have the thermal optics and whatnot. But this is, I think, shows that Vuhledar is under immense pressure, so on and so forth. You get the picture there. No Reports says of this, Ukrainian forces maintain good control over the somewhat higher ground east of Vuhledar. Vuhledar is well defended and safe. Russian forces made some progress northwest of Pavlivka, but the gains are minimal. In an attack near Mikhailsk, Russian forces lost 2 tanks and 3 BMPs. So this is the idea that they are attacking from here and from here, or sort of more around there and around here. No Reports is actually fairly upbeat for the Ukrainians there. Tatragami says, okay, Ukrainian forces continue to control Vuhledar and roads that connect with Vuhledar. The enemy tries to establish fire control over the roads, but so far failed to achieve its goals. The enemy failed to set up a foothold near Vuhledar and these eastern Dachi areas. The enemy attempted to use a large number of vehicles for the assault, but after losing a majority of its vehicles, switched tactics to constant small infantry squad assaults covered by non-stop artillery shelling. The enemy continues assault from Mikhailsk and Pavlivka. The information spread by Russian propagandists about reaching Vuhledar itself is factually incorrect. So there's a big information war going on as well. Their attempts to establish control over the eastern Dachi have so far failed. The situation overall remains difficult. It's possible that the enemy will utilize reserves from other directions and areas to retain the pressure. Enemy artillery fire continues to level Vuhledar. The enemy has used 2 of their elite naval brigades, 155th. They took quite a beating at Pavlivka previously, and 40th for this assault, highlighting the importance. The situation is still difficult and can change at any time. The situation is somewhat improved, but it's still developing, and it's too early to say anything. I don't need to read General Staff to know what's happening in Vuhledar, wink, wink, so he's obviously got some sources on the ground there. Suryak says 337th day of combats begin with the Russian army and DPR forces taking control over the southern and southeastern Dachas and begin attacking pumping station and drinking water tanks inside the town of Vuhledar. So this is their opinion of what's happening. These are the gains sort of northwest of Pavlivka that No Reports might well have been hinting at. So if we go back, progress northwest of Pavlivka, this looks like that. Pavlivka is here, so they could be making those incremental gains whilst at the same time attacking from the east of Vuhledar doing. So Suryak maps and pro-Russians would say they've got a major foothold here that is allowing them to attack from there. But then other people saying no, they don't really have that foothold. So you make up your own mind. ISW says Russian sources widely claim that Russian troops interdicted the Pokrovsk-Vuhledar highway, although there is no one clear highway that runs from Pokrovsk, which is northwest of Vuhledar, to Vuhledar, which likely means the Russian sources are claiming control of a segment of the Velika-Novosilka-Pavlivka highway that runs just south of Vuhledar. So, just to let you know what they're talking about there, this is this road coming down here that I think that they're claiming to control, but it's more likely this road from Velika-Novosilka. There was attacking yesterday towards Preshchivka. So it's more likely this road that is being interdicted. A Russian military blogger claimed that the Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defences on the southern outskirts of Vuhledar and gained positions in Vuhledar itself. A video taken by Ukrainian troops in the Vuhledar area shows heavy smoke near Vuhledar, and the Ukrainian soldiers stated that Russian forces are actively storming the settlement. So it does appear that there is fighting going on in Vuhledar, despite what some of the pro-Ukrainian sources are saying. Several Russian sources emphasize that Russian forces still do not control all of Vuhledar, but that heavy fighting is underway. So the fog of war, operational security, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian sources. The reality is, I mean, I haven't changed my maps, but you understand what I'm saying. I mean, it's likely. I might change my maps. Actually, it to me, it's likely that uh, Syriac maps is somewhat correct, right? And they've been fairly correct recently when the Russians have been doing well. Like I say, around Bakhmut, they've been fairly accurate. I would say this is probably what's going on. Whether you call that control or whether you call that grey zone is debatable, but that they are certainly pressuring from these two directions, and fighting is heavy and ongoing, and Vuhledar is under an immense amount of pressure. So that's that, and we'll move on towards Zaporizhia now. Not too much information has come out on this Zaporizhia area, other than, yeah, I guess much of the same from the last few days. The varying accounts that the Russians are giving about what's going on there. Head of the Ukrainian Joint Press Center has stated that Russian forces have amassed a powerful have stated to have not massed a powerful enough strike force to conduct an offensive in the Zaporizhia direction, but warned that Russian forces have somewhat strengthened their manpower presence in Zaporizhia area at the cost of other units and directions of advance. Yerin noted that the Russian troops continue to conduct ground attacks with 10-person squad-sized formations and to fire on Ukrainian forces with tube and rocket artillery. Yerin also stated that Russian forces may intend to fix Ukrainian forces along the Zaporizhia Oblast front line. These efforts are inconsistent with the continuing Russian information operation of an ongoing successful Russian offensive in the Zaporizhia area. So the idea is that some Russian mill bloggers and voices are saying there is a Russian offensive brewing here. And then the Ukrainians are saying, well, actually, there's not enough Russian forces here for an offensive. They are fixing us here, but they are somewhat reinforcing forces, which means in other areas those forces will be uh, less strong. Uh, exactly what's going on here is a bit of an unknown in terms of what the Russian strategy is, and yet some other Russian voices are saying the Ukrainians are building up forces for a counter-offensive. So, you know, that several Russian mill bloggers continue to warn of a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia direction, indicating that ongoing ground attacks in this area and the accompanying information operation are likely aimed at spoiling Ukrainian efforts. And they claim that Ukrainian forces are preparing for active hostilities and transported a column of armoured vehicles towards Kamianske and the eastern bank of the Kakhovka reservoir. So that's the Kakhovka reservoir. Kamianske is under, there's fighting going on there. Uh, it's about half and half split between Russians and Ukrainians, uh, and that, you know, Russians did claim that they had made some great successes there, but then they're pushed back, and then so on and so forth. What's going on here? Are the Russians, as I just said, trying to spoil the potential Ukrainian counteroffensive by having all these dotted attacks? You know, Drozhyanka here and all the way to Vuhledar stops the Ukrainian doing their big counteroffensive because they're having to throw little bits of reinforcements here and there and everywhere to try and fight all these small attacks that are taking place. As I say, is it spoiling, fixing the Ukrainians, or is it a sign of an upcoming Russian counteroffensive? So on and so forth. Then we come down to Kherson. Again, no big news. There's been the claim of another landing on the. So Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces attempted to conduct another landing on the east or the left bank uh, in Kherson Oblast on January the 26th. Russian mill bloggers, including one who has previously fabricated information. I don't know whether that's Rebar they're claiming. I'll have to look at the footnotes. Claimed that Russian artillery fire prevented the Ukrainian forces from landing near Kakhovka overnight from 25th to 26th. So that was the attack that I showed you. Of course, they did land, and there is evidence of that. Ukrainian forces conducted a successful raid near Kakhovka on the 23rd and 24th. Unless that's the 23rd, maybe there's a second one that was attempted, and the Russians claim they have repelled. So yeah, um, there is activity going on the Dnipro River around, it seems, Novokakhovka and Kakhovka. So yeah, what will the question, I guess, is why is it just trying to take out certain accumulations, certain pieces of equipment, command and control, or is it to actually soften this area for an actual push so the Ukrainians can get some kind of bridgehead on the eastern bank? I don't know. It's interesting. Those are the two options. Are they just special forces operations that you might see dotted up and down this kind of front in order to harry the Russians, or is it something bigger? Other than that, not too much to report. That ended up being longer than I expected because I talked too much. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for the 27th. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for all your help. All the ways you can help the channel are in the description below. And I'll speak to you hopefully later.